If I told you that right behind me here in that field was one of the most important Roman settlements in this country to have ever existed, you probably think I've gone a bit mad, because there's nothing but open field, trees and such, no city or town to speak of, and no continuation of population. But if we head just down the corner there, well, there is something quite significant to show you. So here to my left is what looks like it's an embankment, but actually it's hiding our first piece of tangible evidence there was something here. Just crouch down here, and this is a Roman wall. You can even still see the Roman concrete, the mortar that binds all of these flints and bits of masonry. More on that later. Not the best example of the wall here on site, but there was some more to see a bit further on. But it doesn't explain why there's no population here still. It doesn't explain why it's just an expanse of field and what happened here. For that, we need to talk about the roots. And here we are finally on the southern side of Calleva Atrebatum, and here we are at one of 5 entrances to this magnificent site that would have sat behind me there. But it had 6 routes in. That's because this one headed in 2 different directions, southwest. You'd have taken Route 42 all the way down to Winchester. Southeast, you'd have ended up in Chichester on Route 155. And then if we go into sight and we look to the west over there, you'd have found the Portway, which would take you all the way to Dorchester via Salisbury and Bradbury Rings. And then in the northwest corner, you'd have found a route, Ermine Street, which would take you on Route 41 all the way up to Cirencester. And then on the northernmost side, right over in the distance, you'd have found the lost route to Alchester, Route 160. And then finally, not too far from the church over there, you'd have found the easternmost route, which would be back on the Portway. And that would take you all the way to Londinium, Route 44A. But all that is good, but none of that tells us why there's nothing here today. Nothing continued soon after the Romans disappeared, unlike many other cities and towns in the UK today. Welcome to the story of the Roman town that just vanished. Our story starts in more modern times. The year is 1866, and a lot of the land here at Calleva Atrebatum and much of the surrounding villages are owned by the Duke of Wellington, the second Duke of Wellington in fact. The Duke served in the military and then went on for a short stint in political office. No children to speak of, and an unhappy marriage. One thing he did enjoy though was his history. Lucky for him, he had access to 2 great mines within just a stone's throw away. The walls here are just staggering. You can see every detail from the mortar, the flints they used, the layered bits of masonry thereafter to sort of hold the structure all together. It's truly something else. 1860s, Reverend James Joyce and his wife Ellen lived over in Stratfield-Say. He was a rector there at the time. The good Duke, he wanted to know more of the context of this area. There's walls here, Roman walls, so he appointed keen archaeologists James and Ellen at the time to do some excavations and some digs here. So 1864, they set about doing just that. 1864 to 1878, Joyce kept a fascinating journal. He studied Darwin's theories of earthworms and was fascinated by the notion of stratification. He was extremely meticulous. Within 2 years he found something, which at the time fitted with his theories. He found the Silchester eagle. October the 9th, 1866, found in the main forum basilica, between 2 layers of burnt material. This puzzled scholars and antiquarians alike. No one really knew exactly what it was, but Joyce declared it an imperial standard of a Roman legion, hugely important symbolically, and would have been attached to a staff. And he said that, well, in a last-ditch battle to protect this symbolic eagle, well, it was shoved between 2 wooden beams, which is where it was found by Joyce and his wife Ellen. And that was that. That made perfect sense to Joyce. The symbol of the standard was such an important thing. There was tales of Roman armies fighting for decades to try and recover these symbols, so it all fitted well. It was shoved between these two wooden beams to protect it, and a last ditch attempt. Made perfect sense.
I spent a couple of days filming here, walking the walls and the surrounding area, trying to take in as much as I could and savour it all. But the one thing that always sticks with me is the roots in. It really was the centre of a hub for the Romans and before. One particular route caught my eye.
Walking up this short strip of woodland called Caesar's Belt, and it follows the path of a Roman road, and I love the idea of finding a good bit of agger, a Roman road there. Great example right there. It's someone may not have seen or recognised for centuries, decades, a long period of time, and this is one of the 6 routes that went into Calleva. Into the heart of Calleva, and you'd have been able to travel from London through Calleva and all the way down through Andover, Salisbury, onto Bradbury Rings and on into Dorchester. I just love the idea of maybe one day stumbling across an old Roman milestone. In fact, this clearing here gives us probably the best example we can see clearly, because it rises about 3 or 4 feet up to here, and if I look that way behind the camera, I've got a gorgeous agger which I might be able to walk along a little bit of. You can see the flint underneath my feet, which I guess they used to bulk it out before they filled it with finer grains. And yeah, look at this, a beautiful clearing ahead of me. Now the excavations at Calleva continued. The fascination with what was there under the ground really took hold 1890, and there was an 18-year project between 1890 and 1908 by the Society of Antiquities of London project, and they did just that, and they discovered so much, including these wonderful bathhouses which are said to be the oldest post-Roman invasion masonry buildings. And the scene ahead of me there, just gorgeous, beautiful agger. I wonder how many people sort of walk past the byway just there, well, either recognise or don't recognise what I can see now.
But perhaps things started to change direction with Molly Cotton, or Mary Cotton. Born 1902, she was one of the first females to train at the London School of Medicine, qualifying as a doctor. However, in 1928, Mary married a Canadian cardiologist. Well, this seemingly spurred her on to taking interest which had perhaps been dormant before. It seems Mary's first love was pre-Roman. She had a fascination with Iron Age and subsequently did extensive work on Maiden Castle and of course here at Calleva. Molly received a postgraduate diploma at the London Institute of Archaeology and turned her attention to pre-Roman Britain even further. This is perhaps our first indication that we should be looking back further than a Roman period.
Now just ahead of me here, we're getting closer now to Calleva on the Portway from the southwest, and there's a church I wanted to have a look at. I'd earmark this in my notes, St Peter's Church south of Tadley. Now from this side on first inspection you may not think it's that old, but if we pop inside, it's currently under renovation. There's huge scaffolding above me. This end is all brick. Sadly it's locked up, but more importantly, something I've never seen before in a churchyard, a complete line of graves marking the boundary on the graveyard. Right up close to each other, and they're very old, I would say 1800s. So the reason why I wanted to show you this church, or at least have a look in here, is I wondered on the significance of this bit, because the Portway, the road where we're walking on, is just about 100 metres that way. We're going to take a look and catch up on our journey into Calleva. Now according to the OS maps, the projected Roman road route comes through this field here down into the woods ahead of me. and I should be able to find out where it crosses this footpath if I head into those woods. Now take a look at this map, a town plan, if you will, of Calleva. Everything on that town plan is about the routes in. It's almost like the town is shaped to accommodate those routes. It's almost like it was built based on those routes. So why is that? Why are there so many roads here? Why is this place almost like a central hub for the Romans? Well, to find that out, we're going to have to go back to our eagle that we discussed earlier. I've checked my map, and the Roman road should come down here, cross the pathway that I'm on, and head down into those woods. Now, I can't see anything on the ground, no agger, nothing. It's a very low laying bit of land here, so you would hope we'd see something. Take a step back to pre-Roman Britain, and in broad terms we have an island split into various territories controlled by tribes and their kings. Now the name Calleva Atrebatum, well, that was, as you can probably work out, the centre of the world for the Atrebates tribe.
One such king, King Tincormorus, ruled with his father from 25 BC, and he was minting his own coin. The Atrebates were a wealthy tribe, and what they lacked in ferocity and army, well, they certainly made up for in trade. Perhaps too much. You see, King Tincormorus' father, Commius de Gaul, well, he was said to have given members of his own family to the Romans in order to keep the peace. Was it actually his son that grew up there? Well, either way, between 20 BC and the turn of the 1st century, we have a lot of Roman finds here. Yep, this was before the successful invasion AD 43, and perhaps, maybe this is where the eagle came in.
So at least now we've got some context to what Britain was like before the Romans. To the north of the Atrebates tribe, well, we have another tribe, the Catavalini tribe, and they're a different kettle of fish altogether. They're an aggressive tribe. They led the resistance to the Roman invasion. And of course, it's 50 years before the Roman invasion now, and while they want more land and more wealth. So the Atrebates did the one thing they knew they were good at: trade, and not with the Catavalini. You see, they didn't have the battle-ready armies, they didn't have the knowledge of battle that the Catavalini did. Well, they had powerful friends, however, over in Europe, and they're about to do a trade that would maybe see the end of Celtic Britain and the tribes as we know it. Yep, the Atrebates asked for help from the Romans. So all that helps us perhaps understand why the site was chosen. Trade and relation here had been deep ingrained for years. In fact, pre the Roman invasion, even the town layout had a Roman feel to it. But why did it not continue? Because it only lasted about 50 years, 100 years after the Romans left. And then things started to go pear-shaped. The site here at Calleva became abandoned to the point that the wells were filled in deliberately. But why? Let's head around the northern walls and try and piece all this together. So we've just passed the northwestern entrance, which would have gone all the way up to Cirencester. And whilst we're looking at the walls around here, well, there's a few interesting bits that show you how the wall was constructed. I talked about it earlier, but you can see in part some flat edges of flint. So the flat edges of flint along with the mortar would have provided a flat, complete surface. The question is, why did they build the walls at all? It took them until 200 AD or soon after. That's 150 years after occupying this site to build the walls, and there's a few theories banging about, but I won't go into detail now. Before the walls you had earthworks around here, which I think were what the Atrebates themselves built, and the bigger wall would have been here, albeit an earth mound in the more traditional Iron Age sense. And of course the Romans then utilised this and shored it up with their wall. As I say, 150 years on, just coming up now to quite an important gate, because it's the entrance to Route 160. Now that headed north to Silchester. Here we are, gated entrance to Route 160, straight north almost. When I say 160, all these numbers I'm giving you are from Ivan McGarry's numbering system, a bit like the sort of motorways and the A roads of today. Great example of what I was talking about earlier with regards to the mortar and the flint. And just here now, it looks quite easy. You could quite climb this quite easy because there's gaps. But imagine the mortar would be coming out to here alongside the flint, which would have been flat as you like. And there's a great example down there of all that flat flint. So that with the mortar, you'd never be able to climb up this nice smooth wall. When you take a look at how they supplied water around here, well, it was by wells. There's hardly any rivers here. We have one of the wettest winters on record, certainly wettest springs so far as well, and the water around here is very sparse. So the wells were important here, but soon after the Romans left 50 to 100 years, they were filled in deliberately. Again, was the geography here completely unsustainable for a less of a civilized population? Perhaps that's one of the keys. Now we understand why the Romans were here in the first place. The Romans liked easy access to water. Have a look at all of their towns, and when they didn't have that access to water, well, they built some of the most stunning architecture you can imagine with their aqueducts. Dorchester is a great example of that. So geography, could geography have played a huge part in why the Romans weren't here anymore, and there is no longer a town here? The only other thing to consider are the arrival of the Saxons, and perhaps Winchester for them was more of an important settlement, a more of an important place. They wanted to make the heart of Wessex and then England half a millennia thereafter, and perhaps the filling of the wells had something to do with that, and they didn't want this place to be seen as anything other than a forgotten Roman town. One more thing to show you, absolutely stunning. Almost as soon as the Romans came here, in fact I think 55 AD to 70 AD, this was built, Roman Amphitheatre, and I've been wanting to see this for a very long time in person, and it's always bigger when you see it in person. It feels huge. So when they first built this, it was just mud and clay all around the outside. Stepped terraces would have allowed for a few hundred people to see gladiatorial battles, horse events. And gladiatorial battles sounds dramatic, but it wasn't in sort of to the death, because I think they were sort of highly trained and well paid individuals. There's a couple of refuges in the side, but they probably came later. They came almost when the walls were built, sort of 200 AD thereafter. Well, this was converted into something very more modern, stone construction, seats and wooden terraces all around the outside, allowing for maybe between 3,000 and 6,000 or 7,000 people to come and watch all these different events, public executions, entertainment of all sorts of varieties, and there'd have been stalls and markets outside there, and wow, the rain adds to the atmosphere. Gorgeous sight. So as I seek refuge in one of the two refuges from the rain, well, this right here for me sums up why I love this place. It's the fact that no one really knows what this was for. There's a couple of theories of why you'd have a refuge in a amphitheatre, of course, but no one really knows, and that's what sums up everything about this whole site for me, this sort of square mile of Calleva Atrebatum. Nobody really knows, and we can surmise all these things, and we can suggest the reason why it's no longer here is because of the geography, or is it because of the Anglo-Saxons and they wanted to make Winchester their capital and do away with this and fill in the wells? Well, again, for non-academics like me, that's what you get, a little bit of conjecture and a little bit of mystery, which is why I love this place so much. So yeah, from the Roman Amphitheatre of Calleva Atrebatum, thank you for watching. If you really like this content, you can hop onto our Patreon or YouTube members and help us out and get a few behind the scenes video too. But either way, we appreciate your support. Hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and see you this time whenever the next video is out.